Salve, meu povo! Aqui é o Igão. Ó, ouvindo um podcast no caminho do trabalho ou enquanto prepara a comida? Acertei? Mas uma coisa que eu sei é que cê tá aí no corre. Hoje em dia, todo mundo é correria. Parece até que o dia tem mais de 24 horas. É por isso que Rexona te dá muito mais proteção pra você encarar a sua rotina. Rexona, proteção superior a 72 horas por dia. Rexona não te abandona.
Desde 2019, a Toyota vem acelerando o futuro, produzindo no Brasil o primeiro híbrido flex do mundo. De lá pra cá, as coisas mudaram. Muitos entraram na tendência que a gente criou. Mas sabe o que não mudou? A confiança do brasileiro na Toyota, que não veio da noite pro dia. Toyota, no futuro há muito tempo. Paz no trânsito começa por você.
Hello and welcome to The Price of Music, the show that looks at the money behind the music industry with me, Steve Lamack, and Music Ally's Head of Insight, Stuart Dredge. Second news show of the week, including very little Oasis this time round after our Marathon Oasis reunion show, although there is mention of at least one of the Gallagher brothers coming up later on, but it's a news roundup which we'll kick off with this, which actually is live music though. The live music industry trade body Live released its annual reports a couple of days ago. As some of you will know, I am currently chair of Live, so I should throw to you for starters, Stuart, to get the unbiased view. Do you want to give us some of the headlines? There's some very positive news, but also concerns about grassroots venues.
Yeah, I've got to be polite, haven't I? Otherwise, there could be a diplomatic incident in this podcast. We could have it'd be like a Wibbling rivalry Gallagher's incident.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. A tribute act. Yeah.
Yeah, it was interesting. It was a really interesting report, actually. So the top line figures were all good, I think, like 17% growth. So the UK live music industry was worth 6.1 billion quid last year. And I think the interesting for me was that's up just nearly 36% from 2019, which is the last full year before the COVID lockdowns hit. And so, all the figures kind of went, massively down, didn't they? So this is kind of this comparison of what was it like pre-COVID and what's the growth. And there's some nuance which I think you can probably get into about concerts and festivals and big gigs and small venues and so on. The thing that jumped out to me was that there's now, I think, nearly 230,000 people employed by the live music industry, which these are kind of numbers that governments love, don't they? When you're saying,
very much,
give us some help. And that's 50,000 more than 2021, like in the kind of post-lockdowns nadir when a lot of people had left the industry. So that's quite encouraging. People have come back in. People have got jobs again. And yeah, there was some of the stuff I got in was like that some of the where's the revenue increase come from? Some of it has come from higher ticket prices because those have gone up, but it's also well above the rate of inflation, so there is growth there. So it seemed to be, like you say, broadly positive, but there are some nuances and some challenges within that it's not really ducking, which is where I guess I ask you, what did you take away, or what are the things that came out from you about that?
Well, similar to you, I think for me, audiences bouncing back post-COVID and the fact that takings are up on 2019, although gig revenues have gone up markedly more than festivals. So I think gig revenues were up by something like 50% on 2019, while festivals are up, but only by 1.2%. And of course, you have to take into account inflation with all of these figures as well. So if you think about if you put inflation into the equation, then 1.2% is probably actually down in real terms. And it will be interesting to see what the figures are for this year, where, again, I mean, there have been so many great events. We put on terrific festivals through the summer in this. Oh, I say we, the promoters of the UK, put on an array of, absolutely wonderful festivals. There's loads of great, independent festivals throughout the calendar now. But at the same point, I think total festival cancellations for this year is now above the 60 mark for festivals that have either been cancelled or postponed or are taking a year out. So there's a kind of, I don't know if you picked this up, well, as you were saying, I guess it's the sort of narrative split, isn't it? Where the industry as a whole has recorded record figures, but at the same time, we also know that at the grassroots level, smaller venues are still struggling to survive, and more than 120 of them closed or stopped putting on live events last year. And we've said this, I think, before, that this is something the Music Venue Trust has always pointed out, that audiences at grassroots venues aren't down. There's still an appetite to go and see a band down the road at your local venue, but the venue's costs have just soared so much over the past few years, with rent rises and energy costs and everything else, that it's almost impossible now for some of them to break even. So that's one of the major issues which we have to address. If you would like to know, by the way, more about Live and what it does and what it's campaigning for, there's the Live manifesto to be found on this website. livemusic.biz is where you'll see what the team are lobbying for, including a reduction in the rate of VAT charged on tickets, which actually, Stuart, we probably should have made more of a point of this in the last episode when we were talking about Oasis tickets, because however much they cost you, don't forget, everybody, 20% of your ticket price goes straight to the government in VAT, which is way out of whack with most of Europe, where I think it's 7% in Germany, 6% in Belgium. But if you were lucky enough to get a standing ticket for one of the Oasis shows in Cardiff, of that £150 you paid, £30 of that is VAT. And if you took the VAT off, you give promoters back more money to put on more shows and hopefully put more money into the pockets of artists who, particularly at grassroots level, themselves are finding it very hard to be able to afford to go out on tour. In fact, we've got a story which is sort of about that coming up later on. But there's some interesting reading in this report. And I don't know if you looked at any of the audience insights as well, Stuart.
Yes,
yeah, there was some great responses when asked about. This is all about sort of audience behaviour, and by that I don't mean how they behave at the gig, but the way they act. And people are buying tickets later, particularly the younger age group, because they're pretty convinced tickets will still be available nearer the date of the actual gig, which means that money doesn't come into the promoters, who get fearful that they're not going to sell enough tickets to break even. But there was I'll give you some other stuff. I'm not sure if this actually fits our financial brief, but the report states 10% of the population have never considered going to a gig, which, I mean, it works much better if you turn it upside down, because that should mean then that 90% of the population have at least thought about going to a live show. 1 in 5 people thought that higher ticket prices brought increased expectations. That was something we touched on before, wasn't it? 36% of people asked thought that people had forgotten how to behave in crowds, and 41% of 18 to 24-year-olds felt that queuing for drinks had, and I'll quote you, had become more painful than they remembered. And I wasn't sure how to read that, whether it's physically more painful queuing for a drink or it's just mentally more painful. I don't know.
Oh, wow. 18-year-olds should only just be starting to queue for drinks for the first time, shouldn't they? So,
I suppose there is that. Yeah, you're right, actually. Busted.
I want to know more on that. Because what is painful? What is more painful about queuing for a drink? Unless it's the worry, maybe, of being in the crowd of people at the bar, I suppose.
Yeah, I don't know. Anyway, livemusic.biz if you'd like to read more of this. It's also probably quite a good time to mention that one of the other big musical lobbying organisations, UK Music, has a relatively new chief executive in Tom Keel, and we'll be interviewing him in a fortnight's time on the show. Next, though, Beggars Group, the UK record company that owns or co-owns labels like XL Recordings, 4AD, Rough Trade, Matador and Young Recordings. Beggars Group has reported a 13% increase in turnover for 2023, with annual revenues now more than £100 million. I mean, this sounds impressive. Is this vaguely in line with the performance of other labels, including some of the majors? How are they doing?
Yeah, they're doing pretty well, actually. I mean, this is obviously for last year. So a lot of the recent stories about majors revenues being slower than expected are based on like the first quarter or the second quarter of this year.
Right.
Whereas this is Beggars last year. But yeah, 103.2 million revenue. That includes all their share of joint ventures. So that's things like Matador, XL, Rough Trade, as well as Beggars itself.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I mean, they released 35 new albums. Some of the hits they said were Queens of the Stone Age, The National, Lankum, Romy, and Peggy Goo. And they call those out in their financials. So they're kind of critical hits, but also those have been some of the big hitters in terms of sales.
Mm.
The other thing I like about Beggars is they declare their climate energy efficiency stuff right up the front of their financials. They've made a big point of this, saying this is how sustainable we are. And they cut their emissions by 5% last year, thanks to different various measures in their headquarters and travel. So I just got a geeky moment on this morning. We were preparing. And so I went to Company's House and went back to 2004, looking at their financial results.
Right.
Which, some people go for a walk in the morning, other people read Beggars. But it's just interesting to see how it's evolved as a business. Because like back in 2004, Beggars, and this obviously, I'm not taking inflation into account at all. This is terrible economics. But the revenues then were 28.3 million quid and an operating profit of 1.7 million. And now it has 103.2 million and 7 million operating profit. So, that shows kind of the growth in non-inflationary terms. And of course, the big thing that used to be said about Beggars was that they used to have Adele, didn't they, when she was signed to XL?
Yeah.
And you could sort of see, like around her second and third albums, particularly in 2011 and 2015, these massive spikes in revenues from Adele. And I remember at the time thinking, well, you can report on these figures, but what is the business going to just snap back when the album's not so new anymore? But that's kind of thing. It's carried on growing. Beggars Group. It's carried on growing really organically. So I think in 2020 it did 61.7 million quid, 80 million quid the next year, 91 million next year, and now 103 million. So it's an example of a business that's kind of just growing very organically, based on having this catalogue, which includes Adele. But it's a really, in a way, it's a boring story, I suppose, because I was brought up on these tales of independent labels being run on a shoestring and it could all fall apart at the drop of a hat. And everyone was kind of a crazy, mad entrepreneur who didn't know anything about business. So, that romantic idea of what a label owner is. But Beggars Group is a growing, sustainable, profitable business. And that's quite an exciting thing in itself, I think.
Yeah,
because it's not based on one big spike or one big artist,
No, I mean, for context, Beggars Banquets, as it was originally known, I mean, it was started, the label, out of a record shop back in the punk era. In fact, they released the debut record by my favourite punk band at the time, the Lurkers. Although their first breakthrough artist was Gary Newman's Tubeway Army. And they had a number one with Our Friends Electric. And I think around about that sort of period, I think they did some kind of deal. I think it was with Warner's for a while, but then decided they absolutely hated it and went back to being independent and have been growing ever since. But I think one of the things in its favour now, it's this collection of labels. It's a very eclectic set of labels. But as you say, they've had a lot of big successes, I think, sometimes with artists who've moved on to other labels, and Adele being one, as you mentioned, and they helped break the National. So it's part of this down to the fact that they've got a pretty enviable back catalogue, which would help these figures, because those early Adele albums, they'll still be turning over a bit of business. And XL signed Radiohead as well, didn't they, after they left Parlophone? And from the back catalogue, there's people like Basement Jaxx and early Vampire Weekend. So all worth a few bob in streams, I'd imagine.
Well, that's how streaming works, I think. When you have a catalogue, it grows organically, and then you might have spikes from new releases and spikes and things. But yeah, and the other thing, and I think this is one of the other things about Beggars Group, is that they were one of the first major independent labels to talk publicly about what they were doing about old artist contracts who hadn't recouped and streaming. And they said, right, we're going to cancel those unrecouped advances and start paying them royalties. And I think that's a good story in that they did that, but they've carried on growing. So they took this step that seemed very ethical at the time, but you might think, well, what does that mean for their revenues? And they've done well. So I think that's another little story here, is that you can do the right thing by your artists and carry on growing. The other little line I picked out of their accounts is they had a little line about equitable remuneration, a phrase I haven't had to say for a few months.
Your favourite.
But ER, as I like to say. So that's the idea that artists should get paid a portion of some streaming royalties directly, not through the label. And labels don't like this idea. And Beggars Group don't like this idea. They think it'd be a bad idea. And they say that in their accounts. So that's a little thing that they've obviously, I think by putting it in there, it's still on their minds. This might happen what would that mean to the business? Would it mean less revenues? And I think when bigger labels say we don't like ER, or when the BPI say it, there's a tendency for people to say, well, of course they say that. They're money-grubbing major labels, blah, blah, blah. I think it's kind of interesting that Beggars Group has said this too. Like it just brings some nuance to that conversation, that a label that has actually done good things for the artists in this kind of respect, streaming royalties, isn't keen on that. And so I think they'll be part of that debate. They've been on those working groups discussing it all. But yeah, the overall picture is a British independent music company that's growing very well, and it's not based on something that's going to go away tomorrow. So yeah, hats off to them.
Well done, Beggars. And also, hello again to one of our own label mates. On our last listener questions episode, you may remember we answered a question about the economics of releasing albums in relation to what you'd call heritage or veteran artists, I guess. A question which had been put to us by The Price of Football's Kieran Maguire, and indeed made specific reference to The Cure. Well, Kieran, this isn't the much rumoured album of new Cure material you're inquiring about, but The Cure are releasing a record in an interesting way, Stuart.
Yeah. So, we were talking about how they've been playing new music regularly in the live shows, but they haven't released a studio album since 2008, I think it is. But yeah, so they're releasing 2 of their new songs, the live performances of them, as a limited edition 12-inch eco vinyl. It's coming out at the start of October, but pre-orders launched last week. It's completely sold out. 5,000 copies gone like that, reflecting the demand, really.
Yeah.
But it's the eco vinyl aspect I think is quite interesting, because they're working with this company called Naked Records Club, which launched a couple of years ago now, to sell vinyl that have been produced using less electricity than traditional pressing machines. So it's like a greener in nature, not color necessarily, from vinyl. And apparently Robert Smith found out about this through the fan base. So some Cure fan obviously said, hey, it'd be great if you did something like this. And he spotted it and they did it, which I think is a really nice element of fans suggesting something and the artist seeing it. And all the net profits are going to Earth%, which is Brian Eno's charity focusing on climate emergency action. So it's an eco release. But I think for Cure fans, the thing is, okay, 2 of these songs, which, I mean, to be fair, you can go on YouTube and you can see video performances. You can probably listen to all these songs somewhere online in an unofficial release. But now the band are going, well, we'll put this out. And I think we said, I'd like to think it was us. I don't think it was us. But I feel like I did say something like, it might be good if bands could just put some new stuff out without it having to be a whole album.
Yeah,
and
yeah. I mean, take the credit, or in this case, with Cure fans going, does this mean we've got to wait another 6 months for the album? In fact, take the abuse of the Cure fans who are now blaming you for delaying this this mythical new Cure album, which has been on the books for about 2 years.
Yeah, I mean, you'll know more about this than I do, I think, but I feel like I'd like to think that doing this is maybe part of a wider plan, and there is something coming, and they're gonna, I feel like you could just stick it out as a one-off, as a nice thing to do that's ecologically sound. But I'd love, because I love the Cure. I'd love to think that this is maybe the first step in finally the new album coming out. But who knows? But yeah,
we shall see. Back to the subject of live music just for a moment. You may have seen this story. Rachel Chinariri has said she can't tour the States this year because the numbers just don't add up. There's various reasons for this, but talk us through the story and what's actually happened and what dates Rachel's had to cancel.
Yeah, well, she's very much an artist on the rise. So she's already been nominated for an Ivor Novello Award. Her album came out in May and had really good reviews. She's supported people like Sabrina Carpenter and Louis Tomlinson. And the best of all, do you remember when she supported Lewis Capaldi? Do you remember the story about how she got that support slot?
No, I don't. No.
She got drunk and she recorded a video and slid into his direct messages and said, I'm drunk, but I'd like to support you. He saw it and it came about. And she posted it on TikTok, she posted a video. So it's not a rumor, it's her saying this. So she's a really fun, interesting person, as well as a talented artist. And she was going to support Remy Wolf in the US and play some festivals. And yeah, she basically said, and this is the quote, this year I've invested all my savings and earnings into my shows, styling and band to be able to tour. And while my debut album has opened many amazing opportunities, the financial strain on touring has become too much. And so she tried to get some funding to help this US tour figure out, couldn't, and so had to be cancelled. And it's one of a growing. It's like it's not a flood yet, but it's certainly a trickle of artists having to call off live dates or scale them down. And the thing that struck me here was just the stress of it all. Like, imagine investing all your savings and earnings into your live show, and then you can't make it work out somehow. It's a really tough situation for someone who, it's not that she's not a popular artist or not a good artist. That's why I always think, like, some people go, well, if you can't sell tickets, you obviously aren't good enough. That's clearly not the case here. She just couldn't make the numbers add up. Yeah. And I can't imagine the stress.
I think there's various interesting points here. One as well, Rachel, I think is still signed to Parlophone Records. So, yeah, and you wonder whether, in previous eras, the record label would have helped out with touring expenses, although maybe they would only give you money to tour in your own territory. I'm not sure. But America, I mean, the point out of this is America is just becoming almost too expensive. Increasingly, it's too costly for some British artists to go to the States. And partly that's down to having to get a proper American, performance visa, which I don't know if anyone's tried getting an American work visa post-COVID, but it's a right old faff. I mean, the form's about a mile long, and it's expensive as well. I think I was told the other day that a standard visa for a musician going to the States is about $1,000 now. And a lot of organisations I know who are involved in music are saying that it just takes ages as well for visas to be processed. So, there's so many delays to people's applications. It can take months, to the point where artists are having to cancel tours because they're not certain the visa will arrive in time. And the only potential way around this, rather than paying the $1,000, is to go for the premium service, which is something like, and this should fast track you, I guess, but it's something like $2,800 if you want to do that, which would hurt enough if you were a solo artist. But if you're taking a band with you, say four people in a band at $2,800 each, I mean, that's a crippling level of expense, even before you've set foot in America. So you can understand her decision, can't you, I think?
Yeah, I mean, she's touring the UK in November. She's playing gigs here. I was researching this. I was looking at her tour dates on her website and saw she's playing the O2 next March. And I was like, wow, she has got big quickly, but that is with Sabrina Carpenter. Right. So, she's touring here. She's still playing out there. Like, hopefully, maybe something can be figured out. But yeah, I think it was just one artist, but I think a lot of artists will have read this and gone, yeah, I understand this. Yeah. Not just the cost difficulties, but also the stress.
I think it's just so galling, though, isn't it? Because on the one hand, as you say, it's very exciting. You're invited to do 10 dates in America. What an experience that's going to be, even just outside of playing the music. You go to the States. I mean, who knows whether it might lead to something else. But because of the costs involved, we're probably losing out on UK artists being able to go out and impress people in the States. And that, in the long run, that's only going to hurt our reputation in America for breaking interesting new music. And I think it's very frustrating. As you say, I know there are some funds available to help with these problems, but it does sound like she applied for the grants and didn't get them. So no tour for now. Although she did say, as you just alluded to, she has vowed to get to the States in the not too distant future.
By hook or by crook. Well, I hope she does. Because that's the thing. It's that this would have been an opportunity, and it could have grown. And I think that's the frustration here, is that she would have been a good thing to do. So hopefully she gets there still.
Right, as Monty Python would say, now for something completely different. Tidal has become the latest music streaming service to launch analytics tools for songwriters. I mean, it goes way over my head, this one. So, back to you.
Okay. Well, no. Okay. So I can explain Tidal. I can explain analytics. So, Tidal is a streaming service formerly owned by Jay-Z and a starry club of artists. I don't know if you remember back in the day when he bought it, and they had this amazing press conference where they had Madonna and they had Chris Martin from Coldplay, and then they had Daft Punk and they had Deadmau5. And you sort of wondered, there must have been a backstage comment about how do we avoid helmet clash? Don't walk on. But yeah, so it used to be owned by a bunch of artists. Now it's owned by Block, which is actually a financial tech company owned by the guy who used to own Twitter. So it's got bought and sold a couple of times. But Block's big thing is in financial tools, financial kind of things. And that's kind of where this fits in, because analytics tools are basically, I mean, every service has them. So if you're on Spotify as an artist, you can get analytics showing you how many streams you've got, how many listeners you've got, all the data. And Apple Music have got them too, and other services. So Tidal is launching some tools for songwriters, because often in the past, songwriters have got left out of this. If you're a recording artist, you can see your stats and you can get this data, but songwriters didn't always have that opportunity. So yeah, now if you're on Tidal as a songwriter, you can see your royalties that are coming in from recordings you work. And you can also see your song credits, which is quite important, because if there are recordings of your songs out there where you haven't been properly credited, you won't be getting paid for them. And so part of what Tidal's doing is saying, we'll show you the things we think are recordings of your work so you can claim them and make sure you're credited. So that's good. And there's links and advice on how to get set up with collecting societies. So yeah, it's all positive. And it kind of mirrors a wider trend, I think, which is for streaming services to launch these kind of tools, not just for recording artists, but for songwriters. I mean, often it's the same person. Often you are a singer-songwriter. You're both. Spotify's done a lot. Apple Music has a songwriting team. Amazon Music's got a songwriting. So there's a lot more focus being put on, right, as a songwriter, what data do you need on how your work's being used? And what tools can we launch that help you make sure you're getting paid? So yeah, a little positive story.
Getting paid, or indeed not getting paid. Method Man from the Wu-Tang Clan says he has never been paid for streams.
Yeah, it was an interview, and he said, yeah, the literal quote is, honestly, I've never gotten a streaming check for any of my music. Which...
That's incredible. Really? How has this happened?
Well, that's the question, really, because I was doing some crunching on this after reading Beggar's Financials, because I had that kind of morning. So Wu-Tang Clan, and again, usual caveat, only not many services give you public details. But on Spotify alone, Wu-Tang Clan have 5.6 million monthly listeners. So maybe that's 20 million across all services based on Spotify's market share. And Enter the Wu-Tang 36 Chambers, like the big album from back in the day, that's had more than 1.2 billion streams on Spotify alone. So again, just one service. And there's like this great site in the US by a law firm called Manat, which is like a streaming royalty calculator where you can just plug in a number of streams and it will tell you how much royalties that should have generated. So
really,
yeah,
you could lose hours on that, couldn't you?
It's good fun. So
yeah.
And there's some caveats, like it's if they're all in the US, and obviously Wu-Tang a global band, but this calculator said 1.2 billion Spotify streams should be just under $6 million in recording and publishing royalties. And again, remember, that's one album on one streaming service. Over their career, they've generated a lot more money from streaming. One source told me that on something like Spotify, they're probably making 7-figure payouts on that one service every year. And the key is this is payouts. So the question is, where's that money gone? And I guess the two things in my head are, one, there's a lot of mouths to feed in the Wu-Tang Clan. Like there's a lot of them. So splits-wise, that there's a lot of slices to be taken. I don't know how the songwriting is split. I don't know what share the various members take, including Method Man. But there'll still be money. And so a lot of money has been paid out to the 4 streams of the Wu-Tang Clan. So if Method Man hasn't got a check, there's some detective work to do, say, right, well, the money's been paid out at some point. Who did it go to? How did it fit through? What was their original advance? Did they recoup? All these kind of questions about why you might not see a check, but the money has certainly been paid out. So it was a really interesting I don't want to say the word. I'm trying to think the best word here. One of them.
Are you trying to make sure that we don't get sued?
Yes.
That's the look on your face is very much. How can I say this without libeling somebody, without slandering somebody?
It's one of the more debated things about the streaming economy, I guess, is that money paid out doesn't always front with musicians, and there are many reasons for that. So it's not that the label has stolen it all. It may relate to kind of what the deal was and what the advance was. Who's collecting it? It's all but it's a strange thing because they're still they've still got a decent audience on streaming and they're still earning money. So he should be seeing checks now. And if he's not, I mean, he said it in interviews like an offhand thing. Like he was being asked about artificial intelligence, and he was kind of saying, "I think it's more basic than that. I'd never got any money for streaming." Yes. So he didn't. He wasn't like it wasn't a big woe is me thing. He's doing all right. Like he's got all kinds of irons in the fire. But I think he probably should be sitting down with some people to figure this out because there was definitely money paid out.
Yeah, this is this final story. Well, it's less of a story, more of a. It comes out of a think piece which I read. Well, an op-ed piece which I read earlier on today, and obviously I apologise for bringing Oasis back up again. But I just want to mention this very quickly. It was you can read it for yourself on the website Music Business Worldwide. I think if you've got a subscription, but it's there's this piece which it deals with Oasis and the ticketing fallout from the weekend, and dynamic pricing, and also when, not if, tickets resold on unofficial websites will be voided. They seem very convinced that tickets will be voided if they've been bought from unofficial websites, so not from Ticketmaster or Twickets. Anyway, there's all that, and they, as I say, they seem pretty certain that with Oasis continually now reiterating that warning that don't buy tickets secondhand unless it's from these places. They think they really will cancel these tickets, which is something we spoke about on the last show. But anyway, what really caught my eye though was this terrific piece of slightly scurrilous speculation that one of the reasons that Noel might be on board with this reunion is that his publishing catalogue reverts back to him next year, so he gets all the rights to all his songs back. So how much would somebody pay for Noel Gallagher's back catalogue? And well, I guess the question is, how much was Noel Gallagher's back catalogue worth last week before the announcement that Oasis were reuniting, and how much is it worth this week, and how much will his catalogue of songs be worth when he has his own catalogue back again? I mean, it's going to be worth a few. I mean, it's not a £1 billion Queen deal, is it? But yeah, should he want to sell his songs to one of those big investment companies, there'd be a pretty nice paycheck in that, wouldn't you reckon?
That's it. My favourite about that article, because it was written by Tim Ingham, wasn't it, the boss of MBW? I love because when he said something at the beginning of that section that's like, we've reached the fun bit. And I always rub my hands when he writes that because I know something fun's coming. But it is true. And it's just fascinating, isn't it? Because, no one talked about publishing in around this until, I think it was like one of his interviews he gave years ago, giving that 2025 date of when the catalogue reverts back to him.
Yeah,
he's a songwriter, isn't he? On most of it, I mean, some of the songs have got another credit. Isn't Bonehead's Bank Holiday? Didn't Bonehead write that?
I can't. I mean, but 95% of Oasis is Noel Gallagher, isn't it? And then there'll be High Flying Bird stuff. I'm not sure if that's included in the deal. But the Oasis songs, I mean, what's that worth? I don't know where I would rate it in the league table. As I say, it's not Queen size, but it's millions of pounds. It could be what £200 million. Who knows? Yeah,
because I want to be flippant here and talk about declining value over albums since the second one. But how many albums did Oasis do? They did a lot more studio albums than I think. If I look back.
Absolutely that, because I read somewhere earlier on, I haven't had time to check it, but I read somewhere earlier on that Gem Archer has been in Oasis longer than Bonehead, which tells you how many records they made the other side of Nebworth. Quite a lot, I think.
Yeah, but I mean, the fact is that I think there are a bunch of companies still investing in catalogues. You can end up in a bidding war still, even though the hype has cooled a little bit. So this time next year, I mean, it would be a perfect time, wouldn't it? Like to play the game. We said this last show, I think, like they're going to have to be good. If they stink out Wembley, then that's going to also. But if the rights revert to him and then someone comes in, I love the what he's going to spend it on as well, or what he kind of casually bantered in an interview years ago, what he might spend it on. So it's not like a firm commitment. But yeah,
No.
what did you take from his plans?
Yeah, he's going to buy a super yacht. It's another great Noel Gallagher one-liner or two-liner. I'm going to buy a super yacht and I'm going to call it Mega Mega White Thing in tribute to Underworld, which is just brilliant. I think the one thing another thing which, because I hadn't really thought about copyright reversion until I had that conversation with Tom Robinson a while back. And if you're a musician, with scant money, Tom was saying having a catalogue which reverts to you every 10 years can be your get out of chokey, financial chokey. Because he was saying that, he said, whatever you do, musicians, don't sign one of these publishing deals which signs your rights away for, life. Make sure that it's you sign for a period of time and then the copyright comes back to you and all the royalties will come to you, or you can then sell it on again. Which I thought was really interesting. So obviously Noel Gallagher had decent advice when he started off.
Yeah, and you've got to. I think the other thing is, well, I don't know. Maybe he wants 200 million quid for a super yacht, but you got to pick quite carefully. You got to pick the company you think are going to manage your catalog well, because as big as Oasis were, and as big as they are right now, what you want from someone who owns your publishing is someone who's going to really do a good job of keeping that catalog relevant, striking deals, getting you sync deals with things. You don't want to just sell it to some random investment firm that doesn't understand the music industry. So I think if this is his plan, which sounds very plausible, he'll have a really interesting time deciding who he wants to work with. And it might not be the person who offers the biggest check. It might be the person who says, look, here's how I'm going to manage your catalog and keep it valuable.
Yeah.
So,
very good point. Very good point to end on. That's it for this episode. Thank you very much for listening. If you have enjoyed it, tell your mates, tell the world. Give us a review or a rating on your podcast app, or mention us on social media. We'd be very grateful. You can also support the show via our Patreon page, where you can become a Price of Music fan or super fan for as little as £2 a month. Just go to patreon.com/thepriceofmusic. And if you have a question which you'd like answered on this show, if there's something about the machinations of the music industry that you've always wanted explaining, email us at thepriceofmusicpodcast@gmail.com. Thank you very much, Stuart. Enjoy the rest of your day. Take care, everybody. I'm off to see Fat Dog again. Album's out today. It's a doozy. Woof woof.